"You forged my will, Meredith. Your own mother." Evelyn's tone wasn't loud, it was lethal. Meredith flinched. Doug stopped chewing. The room stiffened. Across the table lay the real will, signed, sealed, unshakable. "You both planned for my ending," Evelyn said. "I planned for your erasure." Then she pressed play on the nanny cam footage. "Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe." I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. "We'll split her jewelry after." Evelyn stood in the hallway, halfway between the laundry room and the kitchen, when she heard her name dropped like a leftover errand. Meredith's voice carried on speakerphone, filtered through the careless acoustics of the open-concept living room. Evelyn hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She was on her way to fold towels. But then the words came, sharp, casual, unmistakable. "We'll split her jewelry after," Meredith said, in the same tone someone might use to talk about old patio furniture or expired condiments. Evelyn froze. Doug, her son-in-law, made a joke on the other end, something Evelyn couldn't fully catch. It was muffled, low. Meredith chuckled, replying, "Yeah, once the estate stuff clears, it's easier if we just divvy it up quietly. She wouldn't care. She wouldn't care." Evelyn slowly backed up one step, then another. The folded towel slipped from her hands to the hardwood floor. The dryer beeped behind her, finished with its cycle. A cheery sound that suddenly felt mocking. She didn't say anything. Not then. Not later that evening. She sat at the kitchen table after Meredith left, staring at the fruit bowl with its slowly browning bananas. Her hands were folded loosely in front of her. One thumb circled the edge of the antique emerald ring on her right hand. Her mother's ring. A piece that had been passed down, not parceled out, worn through holidays, funerals, first recitals, chemo appointments. Now, just another item on a mental checklist. The clock ticked above the stove. The house smelled faintly of roast chicken and lemon-scented surface spray. She blinked slowly, the silence pressing closer. She wasn't angry. Not yet. That would come later. Right now, she was gutted. In the hollow stillness of that evening, Evelyn found herself walking to the small chest at the foot of her bed, the cedar box. It had been her mother's as well. The wood still held a faint whisper of lavender and something like newspaper ink. She lifted the lid slowly, like the act itself might trigger some forgotten alarm. Inside, the jewelry lay in velvet rows, carefully arranged, carefully ignored. Garnet pins, glass-beaded chokers from the 60s, a set of pearls that had dulled over time but still glowed under the right light. Each piece carried some story, some version of Evelyn that Meredith had never asked to know. She took them out one by one, lining them on the bedspread. Her movements were deliberate, not theatrical. There was no ceremony, only clarity. The moonlight slipped through the window blinds, slanting across the pieces like a silent appraiser. She wasn't packing anger, she was packing history. She opened her desk drawer, pulled out a padded envelope, and sat back down. The sharp scent of the permanent marker hit the air as she wrote a name on the front in firm, block letters. 2. Margot. Her hand didn't tremble. She placed the envelope on the hallway table next to her keys. Margot had been her mother's caregiver once, many years ago. Not family, not blood, but reliable in all the ways blood hadn't been. She was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and brought soup when no one asked. Evelyn hadn't seen her in person in over a year, but they still exchanged letters, notes with weight. Later that night, she returned to the cedar box. Not to cry over it, to clean the empty velvet trays. When she turned off the bedroom light, the room didn't feel colder. It felt cleaner. Not everything needed to be said aloud. Not yet. But she had started listening. She writes a single name on a padded envelope. To Margot. They planned for a funeral. I planned a FedEx run. The woman at the FedEx counter didn't ask questions. She just weighed the padded envelope, scanned it in, and offered the receipt with a neutral smile. The air smelled faintly of toner and tape adhesive. Evelyn stood perfectly still, watching the label print, crisp and final. To be overnighted, she had said. Insured, signature required, and I'd like confirmation when it's delivered. Yes, ma'am, the clerk had replied. The envelope, with Margot's name in firm black ink, disappeared down the sorting chute like a secret into a vault. Evelyn turned without ceremony and walked out into the morning light. The air had the sharp scent of cooling asphalt, a distant lawnmower, and somewhere, jasmine. She didn't feel triumphant, she felt factual. By the time Meredith arrived the next day, the house was already vacuumed, the dishes were put away, and Evelyn had arranged a tray of cucumber sandwiches and lemon bars with unsettling precision. Everything in its place. That included her face. Meredith flopped into the chair across from her at the kitchen table, sunglasses still perched on her head. She carried a brochure in each hand like a dealer laying down cards. "So," Meredith said, opening the glossy pamphlet, "Doug and I were thinking about doing the Alaska cruise next summer, but the Mediterranean one looks amazing too. Villas in Santorini." Evelyn nodded slowly, biting into a sandwich with deliberate care. Santorini would be beautiful. And you know," Meredith added, glancing out the window like she were commenting on the weather, when you're not around anymore, we'll figure out your things together. That way it doesn't get messy." Evelyn blinked once, as if processing the breeze, not the betrayal. "Well," she said softly, folding her napkin with careful precision, "I'm still here. Don't worry." The comment slid by Meredith unnoticed, or maybe just unchallenged. She moved on, flipping to a page about wine tastings in Italy, as though she hadn't just planned her mother's absence over cucumber and cruise packages. That evening, Evelyn pulled a worn business card from her desk drawer. The edges were frayed from time, the ink slightly faded. Eleanor Briggs, estate attorney. She dialed the number with a steady hand and waited as it rang. "Evelyn," Eleanor said, the familiarity immediate, "you keeping those troublemakers in line?" "Trying to," Evelyn said with a smile that didn't reach her voice. "I need to update my will." They met the next afternoon. Evelyn arrived early with a printed copy of her current documents and a legal pad filled with notes written in block letters. She handed them over without small talk. "I want to remove Meredith as primary beneficiary," she said. "Effective immediately. Add a discretionary gift clause. Give me full control. Final say over how and to whom anything is distributed." Eleanor looked up from the paperwork, brows slightly raised. "All right, that's a serious change." "I'm not doing it lightly," Evelyn replied, "but I'm done making assumptions about who deserves what." Eleanor tapped her pen against the folder, thinking, "Do you want this change to be immediate and irrevocable?" The room stilled. Outside the window, wind moved through the tree line, rattling leaves like a subtle warning. Inside, Evelyn's fingertips rested lightly against her teacup, the rim still warm. She looked at her attorney, not with fear, but with absolute clarity. Her voice didn't waver. The attorney asks, "Would you like this change to be immediate and irrevocable?" She didn't ask. She assumed. The knock came just before 5, a lazy rapping on the back door like Meredith already owned the place. Evelyn wiped her hands on a kitchen towel and opened it to find her daughter standing there, cheeks pink from the evening chill, holding a bottle of Merlot like a bribe wrapped in foil. "No occasion," Meredith chirped, breezing past her without waiting to be invited in. "Just thought we could have a girls' night. Maybe go through some of your jewelry? Organize what goes where, while you still remember." Evelyn smiled, soft and practiced. "Why don't you write down the pieces you like?" she said. "I'll consider it." Meredith paused in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room, wine bottle halfway to the counter. "What's there to consider?" Her tone was light, but her eyes had that telltale sharpness, the kind Evelyn had learned to translate over the years. Meredith never asked. She positioned, framed, assumed. Evelyn said nothing more. She retrieved 2 glasses, uncorked the bottle, and poured with a quiet grace that was starting to feel like armor. They sat at the table while dusk pulled its long arms across the windows. Meredith scrolled through cruise photos on her phone between sips, chattering about villa upgrades and spa packages as if their last conversation hadn't ended with a thinly veiled asset inventory. Evelyn nodded when appropriate, but her mind was elsewhere, specifically on the small, leather-bound journal tucked inside the drawer of her nightstand. Later that night, when the house was still and the air held the faint scent of cork and rosemary chicken, Evelyn pulled out the journal and began to write. March 12th, 9:15 p.m. Let's go through your jewelry while you still remember. Tone, light, smiling, intent, extraction without ownership. Follow-up. What's there to consider? Immediate pushback to boundaries. She didn't journal for sentiment, she journaled for record. The next morning she walked across the street to Gwen's, her neighbor and quiet ally, with a garden that bloomed out of season and a bookshelf that always seemed recently rearranged. They sat on Gwen's porch under a frayed awning, sipping coffee as the breeze carried the scent of damp soil and lavender from the bushes below. They think we fade, Evelyn said, watching a squirrel leap from fence to tree with more elegance than seemed fair. Gwen laughed, eyes crinkling. I'm not fading. I'm just sharpening. Quiet weapons, dear. That afternoon, Evelyn's phone buzzed. It was Margot. The box came, Margot said without greeting. Everything okay? Yes, just hold it for now, Evelyn replied. There was a pause. You want me to inventory it? No, Evelyn said, her voice soft. Just keep it safe. You're the only one I trust to. I'll put it in my safe, and I'll pretend I don't know what it is. Evelyn smiled. Thank you. That evening, after dinner, Evelyn found herself back at the kitchen table, laptop open. She rarely used social media, but tonight she opened Meredith's profile, scrolling without clicking. New photos, a caption about reclaiming space. 2 shared links, one to an estate sale company, another to an article titled How to Gently Guide Aging Parents Toward Downsizing. Evelyn sat very still. She wasn't surprised. Not anymore. But a stillness settled in her chest like gravity. Heavy. Anchoring. She closed the laptop with careful fingers and turned off the light. Her phone buzzed. Text from Meredith. Mom? Can I borrow your necklace for dinner Saturday? The green one. Goes with my dress. Evelyn stared at the message, her thumb hovering above the screen. The audacity wasn't new, but tonight she was documenting it. A text pops up. Mom, can I borrow your necklace for dinner Saturday? She wanted an accessory. I saw an autopsy. The necklace wasn't missing. It was exactly where Evelyn had placed it, wrapped in linen, tucked inside a hollowed-out dictionary on the back shelf of the upstairs study. But when Meredith arrived that afternoon, palms open and voice light with false nostalgia, Evelyn simply said, Oh, that one. I can't find it. Meredith's smile flickered like a bulb about to burn out. Seriously? She asked, trying to sound amused instead of annoyed. Doug, leaning against the counter with a glass of orange soda in one hand, chuckled without warmth. Probably all tangled up in old lady stuff. The words were meant to be harmless, a joke wrapped in family familiarity. But Evelyn felt them like a scalpel. They were dissecting her already, cataloging her life while she was still pouring the tea. She stirred her cup slowly. The clink of the spoon against porcelain was louder than the silence that followed. The necklace they wanted was an emerald teardrop, vintage, modest, something her mother wore only once a year but cleaned monthly. To Meredith, it was color. To Evelyn, it was breath. She watched them both, her daughter and son-in-law, standing in her kitchen like surveyors, mentally measuring the emotional weight of objects they hadn't earned. That night, Evelyn drove to the small, old branch of the bank she hadn't used in years. It still had brass trim on the doors and dusty carpet that smelled faintly of copier toner and the ghosts of teller conversations. The manager, a woman named Judith with soft eyes and a voice like creased velvet, remembered her instantly. I'd like to open a private lockbox, Evelyn said, and set it up under a new trust, quietly. Judith nodded without questions. We have something on the second floor, windowless, very private. Inside the lockbox, Evelyn placed the deed to her house, 2 savings bonds, 3 family heirlooms she hadn't yet relocated, and a single flash drive labeled in her own handwriting, "Legacy, Private." When the vault door shut, it made no sound, but Evelyn felt the quiet thunder of it. Later that week, Meredith invited herself over for dinner. She brought store-bought lasagna, a new haircut, and a fresh list of thinly veiled suggestions. "I've been thinking," she said, setting the food down with theatrical generosity, "about the house. It's a lot of space, Mom, and a lot of stairs. I mean, when the time comes, downsizing might actually be a relief." Evelyn didn't flinch. She refilled their water glasses and folded the napkins with quiet precision. When the lasagna was half-eaten and the awkward politeness had started to fray, Evelyn leaned forward across the table, her voice low but steady. "I hope it takes a while," she said, smiling faintly. "I've got plans." Meredith blinked. "Like, what kind of plans?" "Ones you wouldn't understand, yet." The rest of the meal passed in silence. Not icy, just dense. After dessert, store-bought pound cake still in its plastic container, Doug stepped into the kitchen to toss the trash. Evelyn was rinsing plates when she heard him murmur, low enough that he must have thought she couldn't hear. "We'll keep an eye on the will," he said, "just in case she forgets things." Evelyn didn't turn around. She just dried the same plate twice. Doug's voice lowers. "We'll keep an eye on the will just in case she forgets things. They submitted a version of my will, but I didn't write it." The envelope was tucked inside a stack of junk mail, credit card offers, furniture store flyers, and a hospice pamphlet with a smiling nurse on the cover. Evelyn almost missed it. There was no return address, just her name printed in block type. Too formal, too clean. She opened it slowly, seated at the dining room table with a cup of mint tea still steaming beside her. The paper inside was thick, legal grade. At the top, "Last Will and Testament of Evelyn M. Shaw." Her breath didn't catch, her fingers didn't shake, but a stillness moved through her chest like ice spreading across a pond. She had never seen this document before. The wording was sterile, stripped of warmth, but one line stood out with clinical cruelty. "I leave the entirety of my estate, liquid and real, to my daughter, Meredith Shaw Harlan." No mention of discretionary gifts, no reference to friends, charities, or even Ethan, her only grandchild. And worst of all, the signature line was blank, but the formatting, the phrasing, it looked eerily like her attorney's format, except not quite. Something was off. Imitation without understanding. Evelyn stood, tea forgotten, and took the pages to her office. She scanned the document into her computer and opened the Properties tab. She'd learned that trick from Gwen, who taught Photoshop classes at the library and believed every woman over 60 should know how to check metadata. The author field chilled her. User, M. Shaw Harlan. Created on Workstation 3, Evergreen Bank Branch. Meredith's work computer. Evelyn stared at the screen for a long moment, then quietly reached for her phone. She didn't dial her daughter. She opened the encrypted folder labeled Legal and uploaded the scanned copy. Then she called Eleanor. "Can you talk?" Evelyn asked. "Always," the attorney replied. "You sound composed." "I found a will," Evelyn said. "It's not mine, but it has my name." By the end of the conversation, Eleanor had the PDF and a plan. "I'll start the fraud documentation. You'll want to log any further attempts to coerce or manipulate. And Evelyn, don't tell her you know." "I won't," Evelyn said. "She thinks I'm still polishing silver." That night, Evelyn sat at her desk and rewrote her real will by hand. Not the official version, just a personal list, written in the margins of a yellow legal pad, like an artist sketching final strokes. Gwen would receive the first edition art book Evelyn had saved since college. Margot would be given her mother's recipe box, each card laminated, preserved. Ethan would receive the remaining heirloom pieces, and 2 charities would share the liquid estate. At the bottom of the list, she wrote one final name. A stranger, technically, a man she hadn't seen in over 3 decades, a former student from her first year teaching. He had written her a letter once, thanking her for seeing him when no one else did. That letter had lived in her keepsake drawer ever since. She would find him again. Sunday brunch came with all the expected fanfare. Meredith arrived in a pastel dress and oversized sunglasses, Doug trailing behind, pretending to care. Evelyn prepared everything herself: quiche, berry compote, fresh biscuits, and set the table with vintage china. Midway through the meal, Evelyn lifted her glass. "To everyone who's still earning their place," she said, eyes sweeping the table. Meredith paused mid-bite. "What does that mean?" Evelyn sipped. "It means effort still matters, even late in the game." Doug chuckled nervously. "Sounds like a quiz is coming." Meredith's expression stayed tight, her smile not quite holding. After everyone left, Evelyn washed the dishes in silence. The only sound was the drip of the faucet and the click of the grandfather clock in the hall. At 6:42 p.m., her phone rang. Eleanor's voice came through, crisp and certain. "We're ready to freeze all asset transfers upon your request. Just say the word." Lawyer calls. "We're ready to freeze all asset transfers upon your request." They kept checking my pulse with paperwork. The jewelry cabinet clicked shut, but this time Evelyn didn't walk away. She crouched instead, her knees stiff from disuse, and peeled back the adhesive mount from the bottom shelf. The tiny black lens she'd purchased online had arrived 2 days earlier, packaged discreetly in a brown box with no logo. The nanny cam was disguised as a drawer knob, harmless, inconspicuous, quietly watching. It wasn't paranoia, it was preservation. She checked the app. The feed was live. That night she didn't sleep. Not out of fear, but anticipation. It took 3 days. On the third afternoon, while Evelyn was upstairs folding towels, she heard movement downstairs. The kind of hesitant rustling that comes from people trying to appear casual while doing something they shouldn't. By the time she reached the bottom stair, the sound had stopped. She waited a moment, then continued into the kitchen. Meredith was at the cabinet. The door was open. Her hand hovered just above the velvet box where Evelyn used to keep the emerald teardrop necklace, the same one she'd already misplaced. "Oh," Meredith startled, forcing a smile. "Didn't hear you. I was just organizing." Evelyn glanced at her, then at the open cabinet, then back to her daughter. "I see," she said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't confront. She just watched, and then walked away. That evening, as dusk smeared itself across the windows, Evelyn pulled the last of her valuables into a canvas tote and drove them to a storage facility just outside town. The locker was clean, climate-controlled, and hidden behind a gate code she wouldn't share with anyone. She left the heirlooms there, items Meredith probably assumed were still in the hallway cabinet. She locked the unit, signed the ledger, and walked away feeling lighter. Margot called her the next day. "You ready to formalize this?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Yes, I want to give you power of attorney, for medical and financial." Quietly. There was no ceremony, just a notary, 2 forms, and a witness. Evelyn signed and slid the papers into a fireproof folder with her updated will. Later that week, Doug came by. He brought a brown paper bag from the drugstore and set it on the kitchen counter with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Just a little something to keep you sharp," he said, handing her the bottle like a gag gift. "Brain support, memory complex." The label was bright yellow. It jingled like a joke in a jar. Evelyn took it with both hands. "How thoughtful," she said, voice syrupy smooth. She placed the bottle beside the fruit bowl and never opened it. That night she smiled at herself in the bathroom mirror. Just for a moment. A flicker of amusement. Then she returned to her desk, opened the scanned file labeled fraudulent copy, and printed it on her home printer. She signed the certified mail label, sealed it in an envelope addressed to herself, and drove it to the post office under a moonless sky. The clerk didn't ask why she was mailing something to her own address. She didn't explain. Insurance was for more than just jewelry. On Saturday, just before noon, her phone buzzed, a text from Meredith. Short, efficient, strangely polite. "We've been thinking, we'd like to take you to a memory clinic. For your own good, just to be safe. Love you." Evelyn stared at the screen. She could see the calculation between the lines, how they'd soften the invasion by framing it as care, how they'd drag her into a white room and wait for a moment of hesitation to make their move. She placed the phone face down on the table. picked up the fake supplement bottle, shook it once, then smiled. Meredith texts, "We'd like to take you to a memory clinic, for your own good." They acted like I was declining. I was documenting Evelyn sat upright in the too-white chair, spine straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. The doctor across from her flipped through a tablet with a stylus, tapping and scrolling as though diagnosing a software update, not a human being. The room smelled like lemon disinfectant and faintly of nerves, Evelyn's, but not her own. "Can you tell me the date today?" the doctor asked, smiling like he already knew she could. Evelyn didn't blink. "Tuesday, April 11th. Who's the current president?" She tilted her head, then raised an eyebrow. "Regretfully, I still know the answer to that." He smiled wider, tapping his stylus. "Good." She passed every test. Number recall, drawing a clock, naming animals, a memory game involving 5 common grocery items. He said she was the sharpest 64-year-old he'd assessed this month, maybe the whole year. Alert, cognitively intact, emotionally mature. His official summary, not kind, factual. She thanked him, shook his hand, and left the office like a woman exiting a courtroom she knew she'd won before the trial began. Outside, Meredith waited on a bench by the parking lot, scrolling on her phone, sunglasses low on her nose. Evelyn opened the car door without saying a word. She watched from the passenger seat as Meredith drove without making eye contact. "Well?" her daughter finally asked, chewing the inside of her cheek. Evelyn smiled gently. "No diagnosis. Just documentation." Meredith exhaled. Was it relief? Frustration? She didn't say. But her grip tightened on the steering wheel, and the silence that followed was louder than anything. Doug, predictably, had something to say when they got home. "Isn't dementia hard to catch early?" he asked, voice too casual, too controlled. "I mean, these things sneak up on people." Evelyn poured herself tea in a bone china cup and took a slow sip. "So does betrayal," she said. "Doesn't make it less real." She didn't stay long. Instead, she excused herself, went home, and pulled out the will documents again. That night, with the soft tick of her kitchen clock and the faint sound of the dishwasher running behind her, she handwrote a new clause. "Anyone who formally questions my mental capacity forfeits all inheritance. Immediate and non-negotiable." She paused, reread it, then added, "This includes testing, evaluations, or informal reviews under the guise of concern." The next morning, she walked over to Gwen's house, papers in hand. "Notarize?" Gwen asked, not needing context. Evelyn nodded. They used Gwen's small kitchen island, coffee brewing in the background, birds chirping beyond the patio door. Gwen signed with firm strokes. "You always were sharper than you looked." "I've been underestimated professionally," Evelyn said, folding the papers carefully. "But never domestically. That's new." At the next family lunch, Evelyn brought the results from the clinic, printed, stapled, highlighted. She placed the packet in the center of the table beside the potato salad. "Just in case anyone needed clarity," she said. "No diagnosis, no concerns." Official Doug reached for a paper napkin, fumbling. Meredith blinked rapidly, muttered something about being glad it's all fine. Evelyn passed the dressing. She didn't mention the new clause. Not yet. That would come later, when it mattered. That evening, after her bath, she settled into her reading chair with a blanket, a crossword, and a glass of seltzer. The quiet in her home felt earned. She checked her phone once before bed. A Facebook tag lit up her screen. Meredith Shaw Harlan just listed an item for sale. Vintage costume jewelry, estate pieces, lightly used. Attached was a photo. Familiar box. Her box. Evelyn didn't move, just stared. Then she set down the phone, picked up her pen, and drew a new entry in her journal. April 11th, 8:44 p.m. She thinks it's hers. She's selling air. Evelyn receives a Facebook tag, Meredith selling vintage costume jewelry online. She wanted boxes to unpack. I gave her emptiness. The velvet box felt heavier than it was, not because of weight, but because of what it implied. Evelyn rested it on the passenger seat as she turned into Meredith's driveway, her fingers tightening slightly on the steering wheel. The afternoon sun was low and unforgiving, casting sharp angles through the windshield, and for a moment, Evelyn felt as though she were driving not toward confrontation, but toward clarity. The door opened before she could knock. Meredith stood in the frame, barefoot, holding a half-empty mug, her eyebrows already lifted in visible impatience. "I wasn't expecting you," she said, glancing toward the street, as if concerned someone had seen. "I know," Evelyn replied. She held up the box, her voice light but precise. "You've been asking. I figured it was time." Meredith blinked. "That's the jewelry?" Evelyn stepped inside without waiting for permission. "It's everything I have left." They stood in the living room where everything looked curated for social media. Throw pillows fluffed, a decorative tray on the coffee table, not a single photo frame containing an actual memory. Evelyn placed the velvet box gently on the table and motioned toward it. Meredith opened it slowly, like she expected a reveal. Her reaction came not with words, but a twitch of the jaw. Inside, tangled among one another, were a mix of faded costume pieces, a broken brooch missing a center stone, a few glass-beaded necklaces from department stores decades ago, and one particularly pitiful pair of plastic earrings shaped like sunflowers. Everything dulled, lifeless, hollow. "What is this?" Meredith asked, her voice flat. Evelyn met her eyes calmly. "Just what's left. Sorry, time wears everything down." Meredith stared at the pieces as if waiting for them to rearrange themselves into rubies and emeralds. "Is this a joke?" she asked, but her tone betrayed a deeper panic, like she'd already counted on the treasure that now wasn't here. "No joke," Evelyn said. "You asked, I brought it." From the kitchen, Doug's voice drifted in, casual, cutting. "Guess we should have gotten it in writing." Meredith snapped the box closed. "You know what I meant." "Yes," Evelyn replied, lifting the box again and holding it against her side. "I know exactly what you meant." Neither spoke as Evelyn walked to the door. The hallway felt longer than before, and she noticed a faint scent of bleach, sterile, over-applied, as though someone were trying to scrub a conscience clean. Outside, the air had cooled, and a breeze moved through the branches overhead. She exhaled as she got into her car, letting the silence settle before starting the ignition. Her next stop wasn't home. It was the county clerk's office where she submitted the estate protection affidavit she and Eleanor had prepared. The form was dense with legal language, but Evelyn knew what every line meant. It locked her estate from contestation, froze any unauthorized attempts at asset movement, and clarified her named beneficiaries with surgical precision. The clerk, a soft-spoken woman in her 30s with a tidy braid and a lavender blouse, reviewed the paperwork carefully. "Do you want a copy for personal record?" "I already have one at home," Evelyn said, placing her palm gently over her handbag, "and one with my attorney." When she returned home, she tucked the velvet box high on a shelf between two heavy law books and scribbled a single sentence in her journal. "Sometimes you have to give them nothing to show them what they truly wanted." The phone rang just as she stepped into the kitchen. It was Gwen. "Hey," Gwen said, voice low. "You should know. Someone's been calling around. Banks, title offices, even my cousin who works at a notary desk. They're asking if you're still mentally fit to manage your assets." Evelyn pressed her palm flat against the countertop. "I haven't answered anyone," Gwen added quickly. "But it's not whispers anymore. It's a search party." Evelyn looked toward the living room, where everything was still in order. "Then they've just confirmed their next move," she said. Gwen calls. "Someone's been calling around asking if you're mentally fit to manage your assets." They questioned my reality. I reflected theirs, legally. The pen in Evelyn's hand felt heavier than usual, not because of its weight, but because of what it would inscribe. The afternoon sun filtered through the vertical blinds of Eleanor's law office, casting narrow beams across the grain of the oak conference table. Dust floated through them like tiny, suspended decisions. Eleanor sat across from her, flipping through a newly drafted document. Her voice was calm, exacting. "This is the clause we discussed. It mirrors their intentions. Only it reflects the consequence back." Evelyn adjusted her reading glasses, though she didn't need help seeing the words. She had already memorized them. Any individual who initiates a formal inquiry into my mental fitness, either through medical, legal, or financial channels, shall forfeit all rights to inheritance and be permanently disinherited. This clause is irrevocable. The phrasing was crisp, final, and free of malice. It didn't punish, it clarified. Margot sat at the far end of the table, hands folded, watching with that steady gaze she reserved for moments that mattered. Evelyn handed her the second pen without a word, and Margot signed the witness line. "It's clean," Eleanor said, initialing the margin, "and enforceable." Evelyn nodded, then slid the folder closed with both palms. "Let's see if they like being documented as much as they like documenting me." That Sunday, Evelyn prepared brunch like she was painting a canvas. The table was set with deliberate care. Hand-pressed linens, mismatched teacups from estate sales, a rosemary frittata cooling beside a pitcher of fresh orange juice. Only 6 guests had been invited, people who'd shown up when they weren't expected to, who'd stayed long after obligation ended. There was warmth in the room, a low hum of genuine laughter, and the soft clatter of forks against porcelain. Outside, the hydrangeas along the fence bobbed in the breeze, a late spring bloom that seemed to nod in approval. Then, without warning, the kitchen door creaked open. Meredith stepped in unannounced, wearing a belted trench coat too dramatic for the weather and heels that clicked against the floor with rehearsed urgency. Her hair was pinned into something that looked effortless but clearly wasn't. "Oh," she said, feigning surprise. "I didn't realize you were having people over." Evelyn didn't look up from pouring tea. "That's because I didn't invite you." A pause hung between them like a pulled thread. Meredith smiled tightly. "I just thought we could talk." "You've mistaken my silence for openness," Evelyn replied, not unkindly. Meredith's eyes flicked to the guests at the table. "I'm still your daughter." "I know," Evelyn said, "and yet you keep acting like you've inherited me." One of the guests, a former student turned hospice nurse, glanced between them with a soft gasp she tried to cover with a cough. Gwen leaned in toward Margot and whispered something neither of them repeated aloud. As Meredith hovered in the doorway, unsure whether to posture or retreat, Evelyn turned back to the group. "Please, have another slice of tart." Gwen brought the strawberries from her garden. Meredith's face didn't change, but her shoulders tightened as she stepped backward, hand fumbling for the doorknob behind her. By the time the door clicked shut again, the room had resumed its conversation as if she had never entered. Later that evening, Evelyn sat at her desk, journal open, recording the moment like a scientist taking field notes. May 21st, 5:14 p.m. She walked in like a daughter. She left like a stranger. The ring of her phone interrupted her writing. She checked the screen. A new email from an unfamiliar law office. Subject: Initial guardianship filing, notification of review process initiation. Her eyes moved slowly across the body of the message. Applicant: Meredith Shaw Harlan. Claim: Evelyn Shaw is demonstrating irrational behavior regarding the hoarding and distribution of valuables. Requested action: guard, review, and financial oversight. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, the silence in the room growing thicker, heavier. It didn't feel like a surprise. It felt like confirmation. She closed her journal and walked to the cabinet where her original will was locked. Let them come. She had already hung the mirror. Meredith files for guardianship review, claiming Evelyn is hoarding valuables irrationally. They tried to control the narrative. I submitted the footage. The flash drive clicked softly into place, the sound small but final, like the turning of a key. Evelyn sat across from Eleanor once again, this time in a smaller conference room with frosted windows and a faint scent of laminate and ink. The legal assistant had already left, and the door was closed behind them. A manila folder rested between them, thick with printouts. "No emotion," Eleanor said, tapping the edge of the drive. "Just fact. You've given me everything I need." Inside the folder were 3 exhibits. The first, footage from the nanny cam Evelyn had placed inside the jewelry cabinet. It showed Meredith rummaging through drawers she claimed never to touch. Her hands moved quickly, furtively, her mouth forming words that couldn't be heard, but her intentions were unmistakable. The second exhibit, Evelyn's cognitive assessment report from the memory clinic, dated, signed, notarized. Mentally intact, it read. No signs of cognitive impairment. The third, a timeline of financial statements and logged conversations, each entry backed by receipts, dates, texts, and Evelyn's quiet, meticulous journal entries. What once might have been dismissed as paranoia now read like prophecy. Eleanor folded her hands together. "Guardianship reviews can take weeks," she said, "but I'm requesting dismissal by Friday. This isn't just excessive, it borders on abuse." Evelyn didn't nod. She didn't smile. She only said, "Good." By the end of the week, the filing was dropped without a hearing. The official explanation cited insufficient cause. The unofficial one came in fragments: emails, private messages, letters from distant relatives and extended family who had heard things and didn't know what to believe. Now they did. One cousin wrote, "I'm sorry I didn't ask you directly. I should have known better." A former student sent a card, "You taught me how to hold a paintbrush, but more than that, you taught me how to see." I never forgot. Evelyn read them all, then took out a stack of pale blue stationery and began to write back. Not long letters, just small gestures. Inside each envelope she enclosed something, a bookmark from her teaching years, a pressed flower from her mother's garden journal, a pair of costume earrings once worn in a school play. To some she sent a single pearl, imperfect but real. She wrote the same line on every note: "Given while alive, not looted after." And below that she signed, "Evelyn, 100% present." The kitchen table filled with envelopes, stamps, small boxes wrapped in tissue paper. Gwen helped fold. Margot brought ribbons. The house buzzed with a quiet energy, reclamation in motion. One afternoon, while sealing the last of the packages, Evelyn looked out the front window and caught sight of her mailbox across the lawn. A figure stood nearby, not postal, not familiar, just long enough to glance at the box and step away. That evening, as twilight softened the edges of the house, Evelyn's phone vibrated with a message from Margot. "Someone came by asking about your mail drop, said they were checking for deliveries." I didn't answer. "Figured you'd want to know." Evelyn stared at the text for a long moment, then set the phone down gently beside her. The scent of rosemary from the kitchen still lingered in the air. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic click of the wall clock. She walked over to the packages waiting by the door. One by one, she stacked them into a canvas tote and opened the door wide. If someone was watching her legacy, they'd have to watch it walk itself out the front door. Margot texts, "Someone came by asking about your mail drop." I didn't answer. She wanted written proof of value. I wrote invisible exits. The cursor blinked at the top of a new document, but Evelyn didn't begin with words. She began with silence. Outside the window, wind rustled the dogwoods. The house was still yet awake, an echo chamber for decisions that wouldn't wait. The folder on her desktop was already titled, "If They Ask." She clicked it open and began to build. Not a diary, not a defense, but a blueprint, one only she could write. She started with scanned copies of the original will, every revision marked by date, by hand, and digitally verified. Then she added the clinic report, the nanny cam footage, and the notarized mirror clause. All of it layered behind a password only she and Eleanor knew, but this time she included more than evidence. She uploaded audio clips, brief, unsent letters in her voice. She recorded them, late at night when the air held stillness, not doubt. To anyone who ever wondered if I was drifting, know this: I was anchoring. She included photos from family events, moments she'd once been cropped out of. She uploaded them fully now, unedited, captioned with exact names, dates, and the memory no one else could claim. She ended the file with a personal note. "This is not a defense, it's a door. If you knock and I'm not here, this will answer." On her way to Eleanor's the next morning, Evelyn carried a single envelope with no return address. Inside was a flash drive, a one-page letter, and a sentence in her own handwriting. "Release only if they deny who I was." She handed it to Eleanor without explanation. The attorney didn't ask. She only slid it into a locked drawer and said, It's protected now. That afternoon, Evelyn took a different route, one that curved past the old high school where she'd taught art for nearly 3 decades. The brick building had a new wing now, glass and steel trying to look optimistic, but the bones of the place remained. She'd arranged to meet 2 former students in the courtyard, not alumni galas or speeches, just coffee, names, and time. One of them, Layla, now ran a small nonprofit. The other, Jada, was a part-time art therapist. They hugged her with a warmth that came from memory, not obligation. "You still wear cobalt," Layla said, nodding to Evelyn's scarf. "You still notice things others miss," Evelyn replied. They sat at a shaded bench, sunlight breaking through the leaves in fractured patches. Evelyn reached into her tote and pulled out 2 small velvet pouches. One held her mother's silver bracelet, the other a gold locket with no photo inside, just space. "These aren't donations," she said. "They're continuations." Jada held hers gently. "Why us?" "Because you looked at me," Evelyn said. "Not through me." They didn't argue or deflect. They just said thank you, the way people do when they know the gesture is part of a larger sentence. When she got home, the evening light was pale and slanted, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Evelyn set her tote down and picked up her phone to check messages. One text, from Meredith. "We need to talk, now." No greeting, no context. Just that tone, pressed urgency cloaked in maternal claim. Evelyn didn't reply. She didn't need to. She stood at the window, watching the soft sway of the trees, when a knock echoed from the front door. 3 raps. Not hard, not hesitant. She opened it slowly. Ethan stood there alone, his hands in his jacket pockets, eyes uncertain but not afraid. He looked older than she remembered, something about the way he held himself, quiet and direct. "Hi, Grandma," he said. "Can I come in?" She stepped back, holding the door open wide. "Yes," she said. "You already are." Ethan, Evelyn's grandson, knocks on her door. Alone. He asked for nothing, so I gave him something real. Ethan stood just inside the doorway, hands still in his pockets, as if he wasn't quite sure whether he was visiting or intruding. The air between them carried the faint scent of chamomile and lemon polish. Evelyn's quiet rituals still marking the house with calm. She watched him for a moment, taking in the shadows under his eyes, the way his shoulders curved slightly inward. At 18, he was tall, but hadn't grown fully into his height. His voice, when it finally came, was low and unforced. "Mom thinks you're hiding things." Evelyn didn't move right away. She walked past him toward the living room, where a single lamp cast a warm cone of light over a worn armchair. She sat down slowly, folding her hands in her lap. "I'm not hiding," she said. "I'm protecting." He leaned against the edge of the doorway. Protecting from who? From those who count love in inheritance. He said nothing, just nodded, as if the idea wasn't foreign to him. Evelyn studied him carefully. He hadn't come to argue, he hadn't come to bargain or pry or plead, he had simply come, and that meant more than he would ever realize. She stood again and crossed the room to a small drawer beneath the bookshelf. From it, she retrieved a box no larger than a paperback novel, wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with a thin black ribbon. "I was going to mail this," she said, holding it out, "but it's better you get it from my hands." Ethan took it with a quiet reverence. His fingers were gentle as they untied the ribbon, revealing a walnut-stained box with brass hinges. Inside, nestled on a bed of navy cloth, was a single silver ring with a tiny sapphire in the center, faintly scratched but unmistakably cared for. "It was mine," she said, "when I graduated college, bought it with my first stipend check, held on to it through divorce, debt, and decades. I never gave it to your mother because she never asked without expectation." Ethan swallowed. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Why me?" She reached into the box and unfolded a small handwritten note tucked beneath. "The ring. For the one who looked me in the eye," it read, "and saw a person, not a vault." Ethan blinked quickly and looked away. He held the box close, like something breakable even though it wasn't. "Thank you," he said. Nothing more, nothing dramatic. But it landed as something final. Earned. He left a few minutes later without being rushed or dismissed. Just a quiet, natural departure. Evelyn stood at the window and watched his figure disappear down the walkway, the box still in his hands. She had never told him that the sapphire had been her mother's favorite stone. She didn't need to. It was almost an hour later when the knock came again, this one sharper, quicker. Meredith. She didn't wait for an invitation, stepping into the hallway like she belonged to it. Her lips were pressed into a line too tight to be polite. "I saw Ethan leaving." Evelyn didn't reply. "What's left then?" Meredith asked. "You've sent things to strangers. You've rewritten everything. So what now? What's left for your actual daughter?" Evelyn looked at her, slowly, as if inspecting a fracture to see how far it ran. "Only what wasn't stolen in intent," she said. The silence that followed wasn't still. It churned beneath the surface, held back by years of presumption. Meredith turned without slamming the door, but Evelyn heard it shut harder than necessary. The house exhaled in her absence. Evelyn returned to her desk, where a yellow sticky note sat by the phone. One word written in Eleanor's tidy hand: "Finalize." The phone rang a moment later, right on cue. Eleanor's voice was steady. "You ready? It becomes law tomorrow." Lawyer calls. "You ready to finalize?" "It becomes law tomorrow." "They plotted around me. I sealed the plot myself." The final document slid from the printer with a warm curl at its edge. Evelyn didn't touch it right away. She stood for a moment, simply watching the page settle on the tray, as if the ink itself needed time to cool. The room was quiet. No ticking clock, no soft music in the background, just the low hum of certainty. She picked up the papers one by one. Her thumb smoothed the corner, not to fix it, but to feel the weight of what was written. Her name appeared at the top, of course, and below it, in careful legal cadence: "This document supersedes all previous wills. It is final, complete, and binding." The list of beneficiaries was short: Ethan Shaw, Margot Alton, 4 named charities, 1 for women's scholarships, 1 for foster care arts programs, 1 for retired educators, and 1 anonymous. Meredith's name did not appear. Doug's was specifically barred. His name followed by an asterisk and a line Evelyn had insisted on including herself. "No individual found to have interfered with or coerced the testator shall hold power or privilege." And then came the final clause, nestled like a fuse under glass. "Any challenge to this document by any party will result in immediate disinheritance of the challenger. No exceptions, no appeal." It wasn't a threat. It was closure, written in law. Eleanor arrived just before noon, her leather briefcase already open as she stepped inside. Margot was with her, carrying a small bouquet of eucalyptus and lilies, Evelyn's favorite, soft-scented, calming. Evelyn signed the final page in 3 deliberate strokes. No flourish, no hesitation, just certainty. Eleanor countersigned. Margot followed. The notary applied the seal with a heavy metal press that echoed on the wooden table. When it was done, Eleanor leaned back, folding her hands. "It's sealed now, legally fireproof." Margot smiled, but there was steel beneath it. "You built it brick by brick. They won't know where to start breaking it." Evelyn nodded. "That's the point." After they left, Evelyn lit a candle in the kitchen window. It was something her mother used to do, light a candle when something was truly, finally complete. Not for ceremony, for release. She sat in the chair by the table and exhaled so deeply it startled her. It was the sound of months, years maybe, being set down. The only thing left was delivery. She didn't include a note. She didn't need to. The sealed envelope with Meredith's name was hand-delivered by a bonded courier. Inside was a copy of the will, exactly as filed. Evelyn knew Meredith would open it in the kitchen, probably with Doug standing over her shoulder, reading between lines that were already crystal clear. There was no language to soften it, no preface, no apology. That evening, Evelyn poured herself a glass of red wine and stepped out onto the back porch. The light was gold and low, filtering through the oak trees like memory turned liquid. The wind picked up slightly, just enough to stir the corner of a napkin left on the table. The world, for a moment, didn't ask anything of her. And then the phone rang. It wasn't a number saved in her contacts, but she recognized the area code, and when she answered, the only sound at first was breath, uneven, hitched, fragile. Then Meredith's voice, broken and raw. "Mom, what did you do?" Evelyn said nothing. Not yet. On the other end, Meredith sobbed, loud, helpless, like someone grieving something they only now realized was alive and out of reach. Meredith calls, sobbing. She asked what comes after. I said, peace. The call hadn't lasted long, but the residue of it clung to the air like the final notes of a storm that hadn't touched down, but still soaked everything. Evelyn sat in the kitchen as the sun dropped behind the trees, casting long stripes of amber across the tile. The candle on the counter, burned down by half, flickered faintly beside the receiver. Meredith's voice had broken halfway through. Not at the beginning, when she was still angry and demanding answers, but later, after the silence between them refused to collapse. "You don't understand," Meredith had said, the words raw, rushed. "It just spiraled. I didn't think you'd actually do all this." Evelyn had listened quietly, her hand resting near the phone but not clenched. Her voice, when it came, was calm, neither cold nor conciliatory. "You keep saying, 'this,' but not once have you said what, exactly, you're sorry for." There had been a long pause on the other end, and then, "I don't know." For how it ended. For not being better? Evelyn exhaled softly. She had waited months, years really, for an apology. But this wasn't an apology. It was residue, the leftover language of someone who mourned consequence, not cause. "I think you should come back," Meredith added, quieter now. "We could talk." Evelyn glanced toward the garden through the kitchen window, where the roses were beginning to bloom again in their second flush. "Come back," she repeated, almost to herself. Then into the receiver. "Come back when you know." And with that, she hung up. There was no sense of triumph, no sting of regret, just stillness. She folded a dish towel over the sink, slipped into her gardening shoes by the back door, and stepped into the late evening air. The light had softened into that golden hour hue that made even weeds look poetic. She walked slowly, not to avoid the stiffness in her knees, but to savor the quiet. The rose bushes stood tall and unruly at the garden's edge, their blooms heavy with spring color. She knelt beside the central bed, trimmed a browning petal, and inhaled the green, slightly metallic scent of the earth. As she pruned, she hummed, a melody without words, something her own mother used to murmur while kneading dough on Sunday mornings, a song that meant simply that the world was hers for a little while longer. When she returned inside, she washed her hands and noticed something resting on the doormat, small, square, wrapped in soft brown paper, the corners folded carefully, as if whoever left it had taken their time. There was no mailing label, just her name, handwritten in blue ink, the letters rounded and familiar. She carried the parcel to the kitchen, slicing the tape with her thumb, and unfolded the paper slowly. Inside was a white card, the kind you'd buy in a box of 20, no decoration, just clean cardstock and a message in careful cursive. "Thank you for seeing me. Ethan." She stood there for a moment, hand on the counter, letting the words rest before she folded the card shut. There was no request, no explanation, just that quiet line, so unlike the noise she'd become used to. She placed it on the mantel, beside the photo of her teaching award ceremony and the pressed flower from her mother's garden journal. Later, as she sipped a cup of mint tea and stared into the darkening backyard, the doorbell rang. She wasn't startled, only curious. On the porch sat a small jewelry box, the kind lined with velvet and memory. She knew immediately who had sent it. Margot's handwriting was unmistakable, looped, unhurried, discreet. Evelyn carried the box inside, setting it down gently on the kitchen table. She opened it slowly, carefully, as if it might speak. Inside was her mother's ring, the same one she had once tucked away for safekeeping, now cleaned, polished, reset. She held it between her fingers, the silver band warm from the afternoon sun. Then she slipped it onto her finger. It slid into place without resistance. It fit. A jewelry box is delivered from Margot, with one item left for Evelyn. They planned to split the jewelry after. I gave it away, before they ever knew I'd survived them. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window like gold dust, settling softly over the floorboards Evelyn had polished herself the night before. The ring, the one her mother had once worn through war, widowhood, and decades of gardening without gloves, rested inside the velvet box for a final moment, as if even it knew something had changed. She didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, she stood at the sink, letting the warm water run over her hands. The scent of lemons and lavender drifted up from the dish soap, clean and familiar. She dried her palms slowly, turned, and finally opened the box fully. The ring gleamed. Not the way diamonds did, loud, icy, declarative, but in a way that felt earned. Its sapphire center caught the light like it was keeping a secret. The band, no longer tarnished, carried only the smallest imperfection, a soft nick on the underside, almost like a thumbprint frozen in metal. She slipped it onto her finger. It glided past the knuckle, settled without resistance. It fit like it had been waiting for her return. Later that morning, she sat at her writing desk beneath the north-facing window and opened her journal. Leather-bound, spine softened with age, she turned to the final page and wrote in ink as dark as soil. I wasn't forgotten. I was overwritten. Until I rewrote myself. She paused, then underlined rewrote once, gently. There was only one letter left to send, not one of warning, not even explanation, just acknowledgement. This is closure, not cruelty, she wrote on thick paper stock, sealed it with her initials, and placed it in a stamped envelope addressed to a P.O. box she knew Meredith still checked, even now. She didn't wait for a response. In the kitchen, the scent of rosemary and garlic began to rise from the oven. Brunch was already in motion. She had prepared enough for 12, though she expected no more than 6. It wasn't about the number. It was about the feeling that people would arrive because they wanted to, not because they hoped to leave with something. By 11, the table was set. A white cloth that had belonged to her grandmother, mismatched porcelain passed down from 3 different family lines, and cloth napkins tied with string and sprigs of thyme. No assigned seating, no formal toast, just warmth, shared among those who had earned it. The doorbell rang once, clear and unhurried. When she opened the door, Ethan stood there in a crisp navy shirt, holding a tray of cinnamon rolls still warm in their foil pan. Beside him was a young woman with thick curls pulled back in a red scarf, her eyes kind, her stance respectful. "Hi, Grandma," Ethan said, a smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. "This is Maya." Maya offered her hand. "It's really nice to meet you, Ms. Shaw." "Please," Evelyn said, her smile deepening. "It's just Evelyn today." They stepped inside, laughter already forming in the space behind them. More guests arrived, Gwen with a bottle of elderflower cordial, Margot with a vase of peonies, even Mrs. Temple from 3 doors down carrying her famous lemon bars in a plastic cake dome. As they gathered around the table, Evelyn poured herself a modest glass of Prosecco and waited until the room had settled into its rhythm. The murmur of stories being retold, the occasional clink of a fork against ceramic, the soft flutter of linen napkins unfolding in laps. She stood, raised her glass, and cleared her throat, not loudly, not formally, just enough. "To the ones who remember," she said, voice steady. "And the ones who finally learned to see." Ethan lifted his glass in return, grinning at Maya, then looked back at Evelyn. "The legend," he whispered to her, just loud enough to hear. She smiled, not with pride, but with peace. Behind her, on the mantel, the ring caught the light one last time and winked. "Some things sparkle more when taken out of reach."